South Africa just made a shocking demand. They want former Zambian President Edgar Lungu's body shown to the world. But why? The answer is far more political, far more dangerous, and far more connected to global power games than you've been told. This isn't just about a body. It's about accusations of state secrecy, international human rights concerns, and possible hidden messages to Zambia's government. From Pretoria's courtrooms to whispers in London and Washington, the world is asking, what is really going on? Stay with me for the next few minutes, because the deeper you go, the more disturbing this story becomes. Shocking demand from South Africa? The claim that South Africa made a shocking demand to have former Zambian President Edgar Lungu's body shown appears to stem from a misunderstanding or sensationalized reporting of the legal and diplomatic dispute over the repatriation of Lungu's remains. The core issue is not about displaying Lungu's body, but rather about where and how his burial should take place. On August 8, 2025, the Pretoria High Court in South Africa ruled that Lungu's body must be repatriated to Zambia for a state funeral, siding with the Zambian government against the wishes of Lungu's family, who preferred a private burial in South Africa. Context of the demand. The Pretoria High Court's ruling was a response to a legal petition by the Zambian government, which argued that, as a former head of state, Lungu's burial should follow Zambia's national protocol, which mandates a state funeral and burial at Embassy Park in Lusaka, the designated site for Zambian presidents since independence from the UK in 1964. The Zambian government sought 4 key orders: a declaration of its exclusive right to repatriate Lungu's body, the release of the body from a Pretoria funeral home to the Zambian High Commission, authorization for a state delegation to accompany the remains, exclusion of the family's authority over the burial process. The Lungu family, led by his widow Esther Lungu and supported by their lawyer Makibi Zulu, argued that Lungu explicitly wished to exclude his political rival, current Zambian President Hakainde Hichilema, from his funeral proceedings. They claimed Lungu wanted a private burial in South Africa to avoid Hichilema's involvement. The family's resistance led to a nearly 2-month legal standoff, which was resolved by the court's decision to prioritize Zambia's national protocol over personal wishes. Why the demand seems shocking? The perception of South Africa's demand as shocking likely arises from several factors. Emotional weight of the dispute. The public nature of the legal battle, coupled with the family's emotional plea to honor Lungu's wishes, created a narrative of state overreach. Bertha Lungu, the former president's sister, was reported to be in tears after the court's ruling, highlighting the personal toll of the decision. Political sensitivities. Lungu's family alleged that Hichilema's administration had mistreated Lungu in life, including stripping his presidential benefits in 2023 and delaying his medical evacuation to South Africa, which they claimed hastened his death. This backstory fueled perceptions that the Zambian government's push for repatriation was politically motivated, making South Africa's compliance with Zambia's request appear contentious. Diplomatic tensions. The dispute strained relations between Lusaka and Pretoria as it exposed differing interpretations of sovereignty and cross-border legal norms. The Pretoria High Court's intervention, especially its emergency order halting a private burial on June 25, 2025, moments before it was set to occur, amplified the drama. South Africa's role. South Africa's role was primarily judicial, not political. The Pretoria High Court, led by acting Judge President Aubrey Ledwaba, emphasized national dignity and protocol, stating that a former president's burial must reflect Zambia's traditions. The court's decision was grounded in legal arguments, rather than a proactive demand to show Lungu's body. However, activists from the progressive forces of South Africa added fuel to the controversy by arguing against Lungu's burial in South Africa, citing concerns about setting a precedent for African leaders escaping legal consequences by seeking refuge in South Africa. These activists claimed Lungu may have entered South Africa under a different passport, further complicating the narrative. Conclusion on the shocking nature. The shocking demand narrative likely exaggerates the court's ruling, which was a procedural decision to resolve a legal dispute rather than a demand for public display. The real shock lies in the public and emotional clash between personal wishes and state authority, amplified by media coverage and political undertones. The court's ruling reflects a broader principle that national protocol supersedes individual preferences for heads of state, a stance that resonates across African nations with similar traditions. Why Pretoria wants the body shown? As clarified, Pretoria's judicial ruling was not about displaying Lungu's body, but about repatriating it to Zambia for a state funeral. The question likely misinterprets the court's intent, so I will address why Pretoria's judiciary sided with Zambia's government and the underlying motivations. Legal basis for the ruling. The Pretoria High Court's decision on August 8, 2025 was rooted in several legal principles. State sovereignty and protocol. The court recognized Zambia's right to honor its former presidents with a state funeral, a tradition upheld since independence. Judge Ledwaba noted that a former president's personal wishes or the wishes of his family cannot outweigh the right of the state to honor that individual with a state funeral. Cross-border jurisdiction. The Zambian government's application to the South African court was based on its claim to authority over Lungu's remains, given his status as a former head of state. The court agreed, ordering the body to be handed over to a Zambian court representative for repatriation. Dismissal of family arguments. The Lungu family's lawyer, Makibi Zulu, argued that the government's claim claims were hearsay and that Lungu's explicit wish was to exclude Hichilema from his funeral. The court dismissed these arguments, prioritizing national interest over personal grievances. Motivations behind Pretoria's decision. Pretoria's judiciary was motivated by several factors. Respect for diplomatic relations. By siding with Zambia, South Africa avoided escalating tensions with a neighboring country. The court's ruling ensured that diplomatic norms were upheld, as Zambia's request aligned with regional practices for honoring deceased leaders. Judicial neutrality. The court aimed to remain impartial, focusing on legal precedent rather than the political rivalries between Lungu and Hichilema. Judge Ledwaba acknowledged the family's sentiments, but emphasized that national protocol must prevail. Public interest and precedent. Activists in South Africa, such as Lebogang Shovhoat from the Progressive Forces of South Africa, argued that allowing Lungu's burial in South Africa could set a precedent for other African leaders to use the country as a refuge to escape legal accountability. This concern likely influenced the court's broader consideration of public interest. Misinterpretation of showing the body. The idea of Pretoria wanting the body shown may stem from the Zambian government's plan to have Lungu's body lie in state at his residence and a conference center in Lusaka for public viewing before burial at Embassy Park. This is a standard practice in state funerals, intended to allow citizens to pay their respects. However, the Lungu family's opposition to Hichilema's involvement may have framed this public viewing as an unwanted display, contributing to the sensationalized narrative. Conclusion. Pretoria's judiciary did not seek to have Lungu's body shown, but rather to enforce Zambia's right to repatriate and bury him according to national protocol. The decision was driven by legal, diplomatic, and regional considerations, not a desire for public spectacle. The controversy highlights the tension between individual rights and state authority, a recurring theme in African political disputes. Zambia's official response. Zambia's official response to the dispute over Edgar Lungu's burial has been consistent and firm, emphasizing national protocol and the state's right to honor its former president. The Zambian government, represented by Attorney General Mulalo Kabesha, welcomed the Pretoria High Court's ruling on August 8, 2025 as a victory for national dignity. Key elements of Zambia's response. Legal action. The Zambian government initiated legal proceedings in South Africa to halt the Lungu family's plan for a private burial in Johannesburg on June 25, 2025. The government argued that Lungu, as a former head of state, should be buried at Embassy Park in Lusaka, consistent with the treatment of other Zambian presidents since independence. State funeral plans. Zambia outlined plans for a state funeral, including public viewing at Lungu's residence and a conference center before burial with full military honors at Embassy Park. This reflects Zambia's tradition of honoring former leaders with national ceremonies. Response to family's appeal. Following the court's ruling, the Lungu family filed an appeal with the South African Supreme Court of Appeal, arguing that the Pretoria High Court erred in its judgment. The Zambian government, as the respondent in the appeal, has maintained its position that the state's authority supersedes the family's wishes. No burial date has been announced pending the appeal's outcome. Diplomatic engagement. Zambia engaged with South African authorities through the Zambian High Commission to secure the release of Lungu's body from a Pretoria funeral home. The government's actions demonstrate a commitment to resolving the dispute through legal and diplomatic channels. Public and official statements. Zambia's Attorney General Mulalo Kabesha expressed appreciation for the Pretoria High Court's ruling, stating that it upheld the government's position on national dignity. The government has avoided direct public commentary on the family's allegations of political vendettas, focusing instead on the legal and procedural aspects of the case. However, posts on X indicate public sentiment in Zambia, with some users celebrating the court's decision as a step toward bringing Lungu home. Challenges and criticisms. The Zambian government faced criticism from Lungu's family and supporters, who accused President Hichilema of using the burial dispute to assert political dominance. The family claimed that Hichilema's administration delayed Lungu's medical evacuation, contributing to his death, and that the push for a state funeral was a pretext to control the narrative around Lungu's legacy. The government has not publicly addressed these allegations, likely to avoid escalating political tensions. Conclusion. Zambia's official response has been to assert its legal and cultural right to conduct a state funeral for Lungu, leveraging South Africa's judicial system to enforce repatriation. The government's stance reflects a commitment to national tradition, but has deepened political divisions, particularly given the family's appeal and ongoing public debate. International pressure from UK and US. There is no direct evidence from the provided sources that the UK or US exerted specific pressure on South Africa or Zambia regarding the repatriation of Edgar Lungu's body. However, the international context and the involvement of these global powers in African affairs warrant a speculative analysis of potential interest and influence. Potential UK interest. Historical ties. Zambia's independence from the UK in 1964 creates a historical connection that could draw British attention to significant events involving Zambian leaders. The UK may have an interest in ensuring stability in Zambia, a Commonwealth member, especially given the diplomatic tensions between Lusaka and Pretoria. Diplomatic norms. The UK has a vested interest in upholding international norms around the treatment of deceased heads of state. The Pretoria High Court's ruling aligns with these norms, as it prioritizes state protocol over individual wishes, a principle the UK might support diplomatically. Lack of explicit pressure. No sources indicate direct UK intervention, such as statements from British officials or diplomatic pressure on South Africa or Zambia. Any influence would likely be subtle, such as private communications encouraging a resolution that avoids regional instability. Potential US interest. Regional stability. The US has strategic interests in Southern Africa, particularly in Zambia due to its copper resources and its role in regional politics. The US might monitor the situation to ensure it does not escalate into a broader diplomatic crisis between Zambia and South Africa, both key US partners. Human rights and rule of law. The US often advocates for the rule of law in international disputes. The Pretoria High Court's ruling, based on legal precedent, aligns with principles the US might endorse. However, there is no evidence of direct US involvement, such as statements from the State Department or embassy actions. Visa bond context. A tangential reference in the sources mentions US visa bonds for tourists from Malawi and Zambia, indicating some level of US engagement with Zambian affairs. This suggests the US is attentive to regional developments, but it does not directly link to the Lungu case. Why international pressure might be limited. Sovereign dispute. The Lungu burial issue is primarily a bilateral matter between Zambia and South Africa, with a strong legal component handled by the Pretoria High Court. International actors like the UK and US typically avoid intervening in such disputes unless they have significant geopolitical implications. Focus on other issues. In 2025, the UK and US are likely preoccupied with global challenges such as climate change, economic recovery, and conflicts in other regions, e.g., Ukraine, Middle East. The Lungu case, while notable, may not rise to the level requiring direct intervention. Regional actors' dominance. The African Union (AU) and Southern African Development Community (SADC) are more likely to mediate regional disputes. The absence of AU or SADC involvement in the sources suggests the issue has remained localized. Speculative scenarios. If the UK or US were to exert pressure, it could take the following forms. Diplomatic support for Zambia. Both nations might privately encourage South Africa to expedite the repatriation process to avoid further tensions, aligning with Zambia's position on national protocol. Humanitarian concerns. The US or UK could express concern over the emotional toll on Lungu's family, advocating for a compromise that respects both state protocol and personal wishes. Monitoring political fallout. Given the corruption charges against Lungu's family members, the US might monitor the situation for signs of political persecution, as the family claims the charges are politically motivated. Conclusion. While there is no concrete evidence of UK or US pressure, their interest in regional stability and diplomatic norms suggests they are likely monitoring the situation. Any influence would be indirect through diplomatic channels or support for legal resolutions. The dispute's resolution through South Africa's judiciary reduces the need for external intervention, keeping the issue within the realm of bilateral and regional dynamics. Possible legal consequences. The legal consequences of the Lungu burial dispute span South African, Zambian, and international law, with implications for the parties involved and potential precedents for future cases. South African legal consequences. Court's authority upheld. The Pretoria High Court's ruling on August 8, 2025 reinforces its jurisdiction over cross-border disputes involving foreign dignitaries. The decision sets a precedent that South African courts can intervene in matters of national protocol for other countries, particularly when the deceased is a former head of state. Family's appeal. The Lungu family's appeal to the South African Supreme Court of Appeal, filed shortly after the ruling, argues that the Pretoria High Court misapplied legal principles and disregarded Lungu's explicit wishes. If the appeal succeeds, it could overturn the repatriation order, potentially leading to a private burial in South Africa. If it fails, the body will be repatriated, and the family may face further legal restrictions on their involvement. Funeral home liability. The Pretoria Funeral Home holding Lungu's body, Two Mountains Mortuary, is a party to the dispute. Failure to comply with the court's order to release the body to the Zambian High Commission could result in legal penalties, such as contempt of court. Zambian legal consequences. State authority reinforced. The Zambian government's victory in the Pretoria High Court strengthens its legal authority over the burial of former presidents. This could solidify national laws mandating state funerals, potentially limiting family discretion in future cases. Corruption charges against Lungu family. The Lungu family's allegations of political persecution are tied to ongoing corruption charges against Esther Lungu, Tasila Lungu, and Dalitso Lungu. The burial dispute may complicate these cases, as the family's public claims of vendetta could influence public opinion or judicial proceedings in Zambia. Public interest litigation. A Zambian citizen, Vincent Kafula, attempted to intervene in the Pretoria case, arguing that the dispute was tearing Zambia apart. The court dismissed his application for lack of legal standing, but similar public interest lawsuits could emerge in Zambia, challenging the government's handling of the case. International legal implications. Cross-border precedents. The case sets a precedent for how African nations handle disputes over deceased leaders remains. It highlights the tension between national sovereignty and individual rights, a recurring issue in international law. Future Future disputes may reference this case to argue for state control over repatriation. Diplomatic norms. The involvement of South African courts in a Zambian matter underscores the role of regional judiciaries in resolving diplomatic disputes. This could influence how the African Union or SADC addresses similar issues, potentially leading to standardized protocols for deceased leaders. Human rights considerations. The Lungu family's appeal cites constitutional rights to dignity, freedom of belief, and cultural expression under South African law. If the appeal succeeds, it could strengthen human rights arguments in burial disputes, potentially affecting international norms. Potential legal risks. Prolonged litigation. The family's appeal could delay the burial, leading to further legal battles and costs. If the appeal fails, the family may pursue other avenues, such as international arbitration or human rights complaints, though these are unlikely given the case's specificity. Diplomatic fallout. Failure to resolve the dispute amicably could strain Zambia-South Africa relations, potentially leading to reciprocal legal challenges in future cross-border cases. Public backlash. In Zambia, the government's insistence on a state funeral could fuel perceptions of political overreach, leading to legal challenges from Lungu supporters or civil society groups. Conclusion. The legal consequences are primarily confined to the enforcement of the Pretoria High Court's ruling and the outcome of the family's appeal. The case strengthens state authority over former leaders' burials, but risks prolonging tensions through ongoing litigation. Internationally, it sets a precedent for resolving similar disputes, with potential implications for human rights and diplomatic norms. Political implications for President HH. The dispute over Edgar Lungu's burial has significant political implications for Zambian President Hakainde Hichilema, referred to as President HH, amplifying existing tensions and shaping his administration's image both domestically and regionally. Domestic political implications. Deepening political divisions. The Lungu family's allegations that Hichilema's administration mistreated Lungu through actions like stripping his presidential benefits in 2023 and delaying his medical evacuation have fueled perceptions of a political vendetta. This narrative, amplified by Lungu's Patriotic Front (PF) party and supporters, could deepen Zambia's political polarization, especially ahead of future elections. Public perception. The government's push for a state funeral, while legally justified, risks being seen as an attempt to control Lungu's legacy. Posts on X reflect mixed sentiments, with some Zambians supporting repatriation, "It's coming home," and others criticizing Hichilema for disrespecting Lungu's wishes. Negative public sentiment could erode Hichilema's support base, particularly among Lungu's supporters. Corruption allegations. The ongoing corruption charges against Lungu's family members, including Esther, Tassila, and Dalitso Lungu, are central to the dispute's political context. The family's claim that these charges are politically motivated could gain traction if the public perceives the burial dispute as an extension of Hichilema's vendetta, potentially undermining his anti-corruption agenda. Regional political implications. Zambia-South Africa relations. The dispute has strained diplomatic ties between Lusaka and Pretoria as it exposed tensions over cross-border legal norms. Hichilema's administration must navigate these relations carefully, as South Africa is a key economic and political partner in the SADC region. SADC and AU dynamics. The case highlights the lack of clear regional protocols for handling deceased leaders remains. Hichilema's success in securing repatriation could position him as a leader asserting national sovereignty, but failure to resolve the dispute amicably could weaken his regional standing. Precedent for other leaders. The outcome of this dispute could influence how other African leaders handle similar situations. If Hichilema's administration is seen as overriding personal wishes for political gain, it could embolden opposition groups in other countries to challenge state authority in burial disputes. Hichilema's political strategy. Balancing respect and authority. Hichilema's administration has attempted to balance respect for Lungu's legacy with its legal stance. The court's suggestion to minimize Hichilema's involvement in the funeral proceedings reflects an effort to address the family's concerns while upholding state protocol. Managing public narrative. Hichilema must counter the narrative of political persecution by emphasizing the legal and cultural basis for repatriation. Failure to do so could embolden the PF and other opposition groups, particularly if the appeal delays the burial further. Regional leadership. As a relatively new president elected in 2021, Hichilema has an opportunity to project strength by resolving the dispute decisively. However, he must avoid alienating Lungu's supporters or regional allies, as this could impact Zambia's stability and his administration's credibility. Risks to Hichilema. Opposition backlash. The PF statement that the family is appealing the Pretoria ruling suggests ongoing resistance. If the appeal succeeds, it could embarrass Hichilema's administration and strengthen the opposition's narrative of government overreach. Public protests. The dispute has already drawn public attention, with figures like Vincent Kafula warning that it is tearing Zambia apart. Prolonged delays or perceived insensitivity could spark protests, particularly in PF strongholds. International scrutiny. While direct UK or US pressure is unconfirmed, international actors may scrutinize Hichilema's handling of the situation, especially given the corruption charges against Lungu's family. Any perception of political persecution could undermine Zambia's standing with Western donors. Conclusion. The burial dispute poses significant political political risks for Hichilema, including deepening domestic divisions, straining regional relations, and challenging his anti-corruption agenda. His administration's success in navigating these challenges will depend on balancing legal authority with sensitivity to public and family sentiments, while maintaining Zambia's regional and international credibility. The hidden backstory revealed. The hidden backstory of the Lungu burial dispute lies in the complex interplay of personal, political, and historical factors that have shaped the conflict. Below, I explore the key elements of this backstory, drawing on available sources and contextual analysis. Lungu's political legacy. Presidency 2015 to 2021. Edgar Lungu served as Zambia's president from 2015 to 2021, leading the Patriotic Front (PF). His tenure was marked by significant infrastructure development, particularly a road-building program, but also by economic challenges, including a massive debt burden that Zambia is still restructuring. Controversial leadership. Lungu's presidency was polarizing. Supporters praised his development initiatives, while critics accused him of authoritarianism and mismanagement. His rivalry with Hakainde Hichilema, who defeated him in the 2021 election, became a defining feature of Zambian politics. Personal and political rivalry with Hichilema. Allegations of persecution. The Lungu family claims that Hichilema's administration targeted Lungu after his presidency. In 2023, Lungu's presidential benefits were stripped, and his family faced corruption charges, including money laundering and fraud. A post on X alleges that Hichilema barred Lungu from seeking medical attention abroad and restricted his physical activities, such as jogging. These claims, while unverified in official sources, fuel the family's narrative of a vendetta. Medical evacuation dispute. The family alleges that delays in approving Lungu's medical evacuation to South Africa for treatment of esophageal cancer, or achalasia, per some sources, hastened his death on June 5, 2025. This accusation has intensified the family's distrust of Hichilema, leading to their insistence on a private burial in South Africa to exclude him. Family's legal and emotional stance. Lungu's wishes. Esther Lungu and her lawyer Makibi Zulu stated in court that Lungu explicitly wished to exclude Hichilema from his funeral, citing their long-standing rivalry. The family's emotional investment in honoring this wish has driven their resistance to repatriation, leading to the appeal against the Pretoria ruling. Corruption charges. The charges against Lungu's wife and children, including Esther, Tassila, and Dalitso, add a layer of complexity. The family views these as politically motivated, strengthening their resolve to keep Lungu's burial out of Hichilema's control. South African context. Activists' concerns. The progressive forces of South Africa, led by figures like Lebogang Shovho, opposed Lungu's burial in South Africa, arguing it could set a precedent for African leaders escaping legal consequences. They claimed Lungu may have entered South Africa using a Zimbabwean passport, raising questions about his documentation. This allegation, if true, could explain the family's preference for a South African burial, possibly to avoid scrutiny in Zambia. Diplomatic tensions. The dispute exposed tensions between Zambia and South Africa as the Pretoria High Court's intervention highlighted the complexities of cross-border legal jurisdiction. The emergency order halting the June 25th burial underscored these tensions. Hidden motivations. Zambian government's agenda. The government's insistence on a state funeral may be driven by a desire to control Lungu's legacy, presenting him as a national figure rather than a divisive one. This could neutralize the PF's narrative of persecution and bolster Hichilema's image as a unifying leader. Family's resistance. The family's appeal and public statements suggest a deeper fear of marginalization under Hichilema's administration. By fighting for a South African burial, they may be asserting autonomy and protecting Lungu's legacy from being co-opted. Regional dynamics. The dispute reflects broader African political themes, such as the tension between state authority and individual rights, and the role of regional powers like South Africa in mediating disputes. The lack of AU or SADC involvement suggests a gap in regional mechanisms for handling such cases. Conclusion. The hidden backstory revolves around the personal and political rivalry between Lungu and Hichilema, compounded by allegations of persecution, corruption charges, and questions about Lungu's documentation in South Africa. The dispute encapsulates Zambia's polarized political landscape and raises broader questions about state versus individual control over legacy, with implications for regional diplomacy and governance. Why this could change African politics forever. The Lungu burial dispute has the potential to influence African politics by setting legal, cultural, and diplomatic precedents, reshaping how nations handle the deaths of former leaders and highlighting systemic challenges in governance and regional cooperation. Legal precedents. State versus individual rights. The Pretoria High Court's ruling prioritizes state protocol over personal wishes, reinforcing the principle that former heads of state are national symbols subject to government authority. This could influence future disputes across Africa, where families of deceased leaders may seek to assert control over burials, particularly in politically charged contexts. Cross-border jurisdiction. The involvement of a South African court in a Zambian matter sets a precedent for regional judiciaries to resolve disputes involving foreign dignitaries. This could lead to increased reliance on legal systems in neighboring countries, especially in the SADC region, to mediate sensitive issues. Human rights considerations. The Lungu family's appeal cites rights to dignity identity and cultural expression, which could spark debates about balancing individual rights with state interests. A successful appeal could empower families in similar disputes, while a failed appeal would strengthen state control. Cultural and political implications. National protocol standards. Many African nations have traditions of state funerals for former leaders, as seen with Zambia's precedent of burying presidents at Embassy Park. The Lungu case could prompt countries to formalize these protocols, reducing ambiguity in future disputes. Polarization and legacy control. The dispute highlights how political rivalries can shape the legacy of deceased leaders. In countries with polarized politics, such as Kenya, Zimbabwe, or Nigeria, similar disputes could arise, with governments and opposition groups vying to control the narrative around a leader's death. Public sentiment and protests. The case has already sparked public debate in Zambia, with some supporting repatriation and others criticizing Hichilema's administration. Similar disputes could fuel protests or political mobilization in other African nations, particularly where opposition groups feel marginalized. Diplomatic and regional impact. SADC and AU roles. The absence of SADC or AU mediation in the Lungu case highlights a gap in regional mechanisms for resolving disputes over deceased leaders. This could prompt the development of protocols within these organizations, standardizing how such cases are handled to avoid diplomatic tensions. South Africa's role as a regional power. South Africa's judicial intervention reinforces its role as a regional arbiter, but it also risks straining relations with neighbors like Zambia. Future disputes may test South Africa's ability to balance neutrality with regional influence. Precedent for refuge concerns. Activists' concerns about South Africa becoming a refuge for African leaders escaping legal consequences could lead to stricter immigration or documentation policies. This issue resonates in countries like Nigeria or Zimbabwe, where leaders have sought refuge abroad. Broader implications for African politics. Governance and accountability. The corruption charges against Lungu's family and allegations of political persecution underscore ongoing challenges in African governance, where transitions of power often lead to legal battles or vendettas. The Lungu case could encourage reforms to protect former leaders' rights while ensuring accountability. Regional solidarity versus national interests. The dispute highlights tensions between regional solidarity and national sovereignty. African nations may need to balance respect for each other's protocols with the need to address domestic political dynamics, potentially leading to new frameworks for cooperation. Legacy of polarization. The Lungu-Hichilema rivalry reflects a broader trend of polarized politics in Africa, seen in countries like Kenya, Odinga versus Ruto, or South Africa, ANC versus opposition. The handling of deceased leaders' legacies could become a flashpoint for political battles, shaping electoral and governance dynamics. Long-term transformation. The Lungu case could change African politics by standardizing burial protocols. Countries may adopt clearer laws on state funerals, reducing ambiguity and conflict. Strengthening regional mechanisms. The AU or SADC could develop guidelines for handling cross-border disputes, enhancing regional stability. Empowering judicial systems. The role of courts in resolving such disputes could elevate the judiciary's influence in African politics, promoting rule of law. Shaping political narratives. The case underscores the importance of controlling a leader's legacy, prompting governments and opposition groups to strategize around public perception. Conclusion. While the Lungu burial dispute may not single-handedly transform African politics, it has the potential to influence legal precedents, cultural norms, and diplomatic practices across the continent. By highlighting the tension between state authority and individual rights, it raises critical questions about governance, legacy, and regional cooperation, with lasting implications for how African nations navigate the deaths of their leaders. Final thoughts. The controversy over Edgar Lungu's burial is a multifaceted issue with legal, political, and cultural dimensions. It reflects deeper tensions in Zambian politics, particularly the rivalry between Lungu and Hichilema, and raises broader questions about state authority, individual rights, and regional dynamics in Africa. The Pretoria High Court's ruling and the family's appeal will shape the immediate outcome, while the case's precedents could influence African politics for years to come. By addressing the legal and political complexities, navigating diplomatic sensitivities, and balancing public sentiment, Zambia and South Africa have an opportunity to set a model for resolving similar disputes, potentially strengthening governance and regional cooperation across the continent.